You wake in darkness and your child is burning. This is not a metaphor. In the cold dampness of your shelter, barely more than stacked stones and animal hides stretched across wooden frames, you press your palm against your daughter's forehead and feel heat radiating like embers beneath her skin. She is 3 years old, perhaps 4. You don't count years the way we do now. You count seasons, you count successful hunts, you count children born and children lost. The fever came yesterday, or perhaps the day before. Time blurs when you're surviving. First, she stopped playing with the other children near the cooking fire. Then she stopped eating the fish you'd dried so carefully, hanging them in the smoke until they were leathery and preserved. By evening, she was shivering despite the warmth, and now, in what you think is the deepest part of night, her small body trembles with heat that shouldn't exist in something so young, so small. You are living approximately 11,000 years ago, give or take a few centuries. Your people, let's call them your people, though they wouldn't use that word, wouldn't have a word for the sprawling concept of ethnicity or tribe in the way we understand it, have recently made a decision that seemed sensible at the time. Instead of following the herds, instead of moving with the seasons through territories your ancestors walked for tens of thousands of years, you've stayed in one place. You've built something resembling a village. This happened because someone, perhaps your grandmother's grandmother, noticed that wild grasses dropped seeds, and those seeds grew into new grasses. Someone noticed that if you stayed near these grasses, if you protected them and encouraged them, you could have food without walking for days to find it. Someone else noticed that young wolves, if taken from their mothers early enough, could be made to tolerate human presence, could even be useful for warning of predators or helping with hunts. These observations, accumulated over generations, have led you here, to a semi-permanent settlement of perhaps 30 to 40 people, living in structures that won't blow away in the first strong wind, storing food for lean times, staying put. And staying put has changed everything. Your daughter coughs, and the sound is wet, rattling. You've heard this sound before. You heard it 2 months ago when another child died. You heard it last year when 3 adults, strong adults, good hunters, weakened and died within days of each other. You heard it 5 years ago when nearly half the settlement fell ill, and those who survived were changed, marked with scars that pitted their skin like the surface of the moon. In the darkness, you do what you can. You dribble water into your daughter's mouth, though most of it runs down her chin. You sing softly the songs your mother sang to you, songs without words in any language that will survive, just sounds that mean comfort, that mean I am here, that mean you are not alone. Outside, you can hear the settlement beginning to wake. Someone is building up the central fire. You hear the crack of dry wood being added, see the faint glow beginning to lighten the gaps in your shelter's walls. Soon others will know your daughter is sick. Soon they will begin to worry. They should worry. What you cannot know, what no one in your world can possibly understand, is that you and your people are living through humanity's first great epidemic. Not the first illness, disease has always existed, but the first time a pathogen has found a dense enough population of humans, living close enough together, staying in one place long enough for it to spread efficiently from person to person to person. The agricultural revolution, which won't be called that for another 11,000 years, which won't be recognized as a revolution at all by anyone alive now, has created the perfect conditions for something microscopic and mindless to nearly destroy your species. Before your people settled, when you moved in small bands of 15 or 20 individuals, tracking game and gathering seasonal plants across vast territories, diseases couldn't spread efficiently. If someone in your group fell ill, yes, a few others might catch it. But then you moved on. The pathogen had nowhere to go. It burned through its small pool of hosts and died out. Or it remained dormant, waiting for the next susceptible person who might not come along for months or years. But now? Now you live in close quarters with 40 people. Now you stay in one place year-round and your waste accumulates nearby. Now you keep animals, those semi-domesticated dogs, and perhaps a few goats or sheep that someone captured young and managed to keep alive. Now you store grain, and that grain attracts rodents, and those rodents carry their own diseases and parasites. Now, when one person falls ill, they have constant contact with dozens of others. The pathogen can jump from host to host with ease. Your daughter's breathing becomes more labored. You hold her closer, feeling her heartbeat rapid against your chest like a bird's wings. The disease currently working its way through your settlement is probably related to what we would call smallpox, or perhaps measles. These diseases evolved from animal pathogens, from cattle, from sheep, from the very animals humans were learning to domesticate. In the close quarters of early agricultural communities, these animal viruses found opportunities to mutate, to jump species, to adapt to human hosts. But you don't know about viruses. You don't know about species barriers or zoonotic transfer. You don't know that the decision to keep animals close, to live in permanent settlements, to store food and attract pests, has created a perfect storm of infectious disease that will kill more efficiently than any predator, any drought, any winter. You only know that your daughter is dying and you cannot stop it. As dawn fully arrives, others begin to come to your shelter. First, your sister, who crouches beside you and places her hand on the child's forehead. She says nothing. What is there to say? But her presence is something. Then comes the oldest woman in the settlement, a grandmother many times over, whose face is scarred from her own survival of a similar illness decades ago. She carries a clay bowl containing a paste made from certain roots and charcoal. She's seen this paste draw out infection from wounds. Perhaps it will help with this. It won't help. But the attempt matters. The gesture of doing something, anything, in the face of helplessness is part of what makes you human. By midday, 2 more children are showing symptoms. By evening, an adult, a man in his 20s, strong and healthy yesterday, is fevered and confused. The disease is moving through your settlement like fire through dry grass, and there is nothing anyone can do to stop it. What you're experiencing, what your people are suffering through, represents one of the greatest paradoxes in human history. The agricultural revolution, the decision to cultivate plants and domesticate animals, to build permanent settlements and store surplus food. Made civilization possible. It allowed for population growth, for specialization of labor, for the accumulation of knowledge, for everything we think of as human progress. But in the short term, for the people living through the transition, it was catastrophic. Archaeological evidence from early agricultural settlements tells a stark story. Human remains from this period show increased rates of malnutrition despite the presence of stored food. They show dental problems from a grain-heavy diet, skeletal stress markers indicating harder physical labor, and dramatic increases in infectious disease. Life expectancy may have actually decreased for early farmers compared to their hunter-gatherer ancestors. The bones of children from settlements like yours show growth interruption lines, literal marks in the developing skeleton where malnutrition or disease stopped growth for weeks or months. The bones of adults show arthritis and joint problems in their 20s and 30s from repetitive agricultural labor, and burial sites from this period show something else: mass graves. Evidence of diseases sweeping through settlements and killing many people in short spans of time. Your people, like early agricultural communities across the globe, are paying an enormous price for a transition you didn't choose and don't fully understand. Your grandparents' grandparents started staying in one place a little longer each season. They started protecting certain useful plants. They started keeping certain animals. Each generation made small adjustments that seemed reasonable at the time. And now, several generations later, you're locked into a way of life that's killing you. But here's what's remarkable. You persist. Your daughter's fever breaks on the 3rd day. She doesn't die. You don't know why. Perhaps her young immune system rallied. Perhaps she received a smaller infectious dose. Perhaps random chance smiled on her this time. The man who fell ill dies. One of the other children dies. But others survive, and the settlement continues. Over the following weeks, more people fall ill. Some die, some survive. The survivors bear marks, scarring, weakness, permanent damage to their bodies, but they recover. And slowly something invisible and not yet understood by anyone begins to happen. The survivors develop immunity. Their bodies have learned to recognize this particular pathogen to fight it more effectively if they encounter it again. This is humanity's first great plague, and it is teaching your species lessons written in death and survival. The settlements that persist, that survive these early epidemics, are the ones where enough people live through infection to develop immunity. The pathogens themselves evolve too, becoming better adapted to human hosts, and paradoxically, often becoming less deadly over time, because a pathogen that kills its host too quickly doesn't spread as efficiently. You don't understand any of this. You only know that your daughter lived, and you are grateful. But in the quiet moments when you're working, grinding grain between stones, a tedious task that will occupy hours of your day, every day, for the rest of your life, you think about the old stories. The stories of when your people moved freely, following the animals, eating different foods each season. The stories of when fewer children died, when people were taller and stronger, when there was somehow more freedom in having less. You wonder if your ancestors made a mistake, choosing this settled life. You wonder if there's a way back to the old ways, whether anyone could still remember how to live that life fully. But you look at your daughter playing now with the other surviving children, her skin marked with the faint traces of her illness, and you know the truth. There is no going back. The settlement has stored grain for winter. You have shelters that will last years. You have dogs that alert you to danger. You have knowledge of which plants to cultivate, which animals to keep. You have invested too much in structures, in stored food, in the accumulated learning of staying in one place, to simply walk away. And you have paid the price for this investment in the currency that mattered most, your children, your friends, your community members. The dead are buried in the ground that you now consider yours, and their graves tie you to this place as surely as any grain storage pit or permanent shelter. This is the bargain your species has made, though you didn't know you were making it. Trade the freedom and health of hunter-gatherer life for the security and potential of agriculture. Trade immediate well-being for future possibility. Trade the deaths of this generation for the survival and growth of those to come. Thousands of miles away, in places you don't know exist, other human groups are making the same bargain. In the Fertile Crescent in China, in Mesoamerica, in West Africa, independently, over and over, humans are discovering agriculture and settling into permanent communities. And in each of these places, the same pattern repeats. Population increases, diseases emerge, death tolls rise, survivors develop immunity, communities persist. The plague that is sweeping through your settlement is not unique. It is one instance of a process repeating across the world, wherever humans have recently transitioned to agricultural life. The diseases vary. Some cause fevers and rashes, some cause respiratory failure, some cause diarrhea and dehydration, but the pattern is the same. Humanity is encountering its microscopic enemies for the first time at scale, and learning through terrible experience how to survive them. Your daughter calls to you from where she's playing, showing you something she's found, a pretty stone, smooth and colorful. You smile and admire it, and she runs back to her games. She doesn't remember being sick. Children forget pain quickly, mercifully, but you remember. You remember holding her burning body in the darkness. You remember the others who died. You remember the fear that permeated the settlement like smoke, the questions no one could answer. Where did this come from? Why is it happening? Will it ever stop? And you remember something else, something you noticed but haven't quite articulated even to yourself. The old grandmother, the one who survived a similar illness as a young woman, never got sick during this outbreak. She cared for the ill, handled their bodies, cleaned their waste, and never fell ill herself. Something about surviving the disease before protected her from getting it again. This observation, made by countless people in countless settlements across the early agricultural world, will eventually lead to one of humanity's greatest medical innovations, deliberately exposing people to mild versions of diseases to protect them from severe ones. Variolation and eventually vaccination will trace its origins to this simple repeated observation. Survival grants protection, but that's millennia away. For now you have only the observation and the comfort of the old grandmother's presence among the sick. For now you have only survival and the slow return to normal life, or what passes for normal in a world where normal has changed completely in just a few generations. As night falls again, you gather with the others around the central fire. Someone has caught fish. Someone else has harvested roots. There is food, there is warmth, there is community. Children play at the edge of firelight while adults talk in low voices, discussing the next day's work, discussing who will hunt and who will tend the crops, discussing the ordinary details of life that continue even after death has visited. The stars above are the same stars your ancestors saw. The moon rising over the hills is the same moon. But everything else has changed. Your species has chosen a new path, or the path has chosen you, it's hard to say which, and there is no returning to the world that was. In the darkness beyond the firelight, invisible and microscopic, the pathogens that have just swept through your settlement are evolving, adapting, preparing for their next opportunity to spread. And your own body, your daughter's body, the bodies of all the survivors, are evolving too in their own way, building immunological memories that will protect you if you encounter these diseases again. This is the beginning of an arms race between humanity and infectious disease that will shape the next 11,000 years of history. It's an arms race you don't know you're in, an arms race you can't possibly understand, but one you and your children's children will fight nonetheless. And somehow, impossibly, miraculously, humanity will win enough battles to survive, to grow, to spread across the world, to eventually understand what was happening in these desperate early years, and to develop tools to fight back deliberately rather than through blind evolutionary chance. But on this night, by this fire, with your daughter alive beside you and fresh graves on the hillside, you know none of that. You know only that you have survived another day in a world that has become suddenly, inexplicably more dangerous than anything your grandparents faced. You know only that tomorrow you will rise and do the work that must be done, grinding grain, tending crops, caring for animals, maintaining shelters, and hope that the sickness doesn't return. What would you do if you knew what was really happening? If you could somehow understand that your decision to live in this settlement, to keep these animals, to store this grain, had created conditions for diseases that would kill millions of your descendants over the coming millennia? If you knew that the agricultural revolution you're living through would enable massive population growth, but also massive die-offs, would enable civilization, but also enable plagues, would you choose differently? The question sits with you as you drift toward sleep. Your daughter warm and alive beside you, the fire burning low outside. It's not a question you can answer, not really, because the choice was never really yours to make. It was made by 1,000 small decisions across generations, each one seeming reasonable at the time, each one slightly restricting the options available to the next generation, until finally you arrived here, locked into agricultural life, for better and worse, for survival and death, for all that will come. The first great plague is just beginning its long work of shaping humanity, and you are living through the opening chapter of a story that will span millennia. Your survival, your daughter's survival, the continuation of your settlement despite the deaths, these are the victories that will allow the story to continue, to complicate, to eventually reach the point where humans understand what happened to you and why. But understanding is thousands of years away. For now, there is only survival, only the daily work of staying alive, only the fierce love you feel for your daughter, and the hope that tomorrow will be better than today. For now, there is only the slow, painful, deadly transition from one way of life to another, paid for in the currency of human suffering, but purchasing something that will eventually become civilization. You sleep finally, and in your dreams you walk the old paths your grandparents knew, following herds across open grasslands under endless sky, free and hungry and healthy. When you wake, you will be in your settled home, surrounded by stored grain and domesticated animals, and the accumulated material goods of agricultural life. You will be locked into the future your species has chosen, for better and worse. And the plague will still be there, waiting in the bodies of animals and the close quarters of human settlements, ready to teach its lessons again and again until humanity finally learns to fight back. But that's a story still unfolding, still being written in the bodies of the sick and the survival of the immune, still finding its shape in the earliest days of agricultural civilization. How many more will fall ill before the season changes? How many more children will burn with fever in the darkness before this particular outbreak burns itself out? And what new diseases are already evolving, already preparing to make the jump from animals to humans, already waiting for their opportunity to spread through your settlement and all the settlements like it across the awakening agricultural world? These are questions you cannot answer, questions you cannot even properly ask. But they hang in the air nonetheless as another day dawns on your settlement, as survivors rise to begin their work, as life continues despite death's recent visit, as humanity persists in the face of its smallest, deadliest enemies and learns, slowly and painfully, how to survive in the new world it has created for itself. You are 12 years old, perhaps 13, and you are trying to remember something your grandfather told you before he died, but the memory slips away like water through your fingers. It was something about the sickness, something about how to recognize the first signs, how to prepare, what plants might help ease the suffering. Your grandfather survived 3 outbreaks in his lifetime. His face bore the scars to prove it, pitted marks across his cheeks and forehead that you used to trace with your small fingers when you were very young. He was considered wise because he had lived so long, because he remembered things others had forgotten, because he had survived when so many others had died. But now he is gone, dead not from sickness, but from an injury sustained in a fall, and with him has gone everything he knew. This is your burden now, and the burden of others your age, to remember what the old ones knew, to preserve the knowledge that keeps your community alive. In a world without writing, memory is everything. Memory is survival. You live in a settlement larger than your mother's childhood home, nearly 80 people now, spread across 2 clusters of buildings separated by a small stream. Your people have been farming for 3 generations, long enough that no one living remembers the nomadic life except through stories. Long enough that the old ways are becoming myths, half-believed tales of a time when people walked freely and followed the herds and never stayed in one place long enough to call it home. The settlement has developed a rhythm, a yearly cycle that everyone knows. Plant in spring, tend through summer, harvest in fall, survive the winter on stored food, repair tools and structures during the cold months, watch for signs of sickness, especially when the seasons change, care for the animals, protect the grain stores from rodents and moisture, train the young in the skills they'll need, pass on what must not be forgotten. This last task, passing on knowledge, has become increasingly difficult and increasingly crucial. Your people have noticed something troubling. The outbreaks are becoming more frequent. When your great-grandparents first settled here, the deadly sicknesses came rarely, perhaps once in a generation. Your grandparents saw them more often, every few years. Now, in your own short lifetime, you have already lived through 4 major outbreaks. 4 times you have watched neighbors and friends fall ill with high fevers, with rashes that covered their bodies, with breathing that turned into desperate gasps. 4 times you have helped dig graves for those who didn't survive. And 4 times you have watched the survivors carefully, noting what they ate, how they were treated, what seemed to help, and what made things worse. Because this is your role in the community. You are a memory keeper, one of several young people being trained to observe and remember, to preserve the accumulated knowledge that might mean the difference between survival and extinction. Your training began when you were 7, after you survived your first outbreak. The old grandmother, not your actual grandmother, but the woman everyone called grandmother, the oldest person in the settlement, noticed that you asked questions. While other children played or cried or simply endured their fear, you asked, "Why does the sickness make some people spotted? Why do some recover and others die? Why does the old grandmother never get sick when she tends the ill?" These questions marked you as someone with the right temperament for remembering. The old grandmother took you aside and began teaching you deliberately, training you to observe carefully and remember precisely. She taught you to notice the small signs that preceded outbreaks, the way certain animals behaved strangely, the way the air felt different, the way the first person to fall ill had usually had contact with something or someone new. She taught you the songs that contained encoded information about which plants could ease fevers, which could calm coughs, which could help clean wounds. The songs were crucial. You couldn't write things down. Your people had no system of writing, no way to preserve information except in human memory. But songs could be remembered more easily than plain speech. The rhythm and melody helped fix the words in your mind. So important information was transformed into songs, into chants, into stories with memorable characters and repeated phrases. You knew a song about the seasons and when to plant each crop. You knew a story about a clever hunter who observed animal behavior to predict weather changes. You knew a chant that listed in careful order the steps for treating someone who had eaten poisonous plants. You knew dozens of these memory devices, and you were learning more each season from the remaining elders. But the elders were dying faster than they could pass on everything they knew. This was the crisis your community faced, though most people didn't fully recognize it yet. The diseases that had come with agricultural life were killing people before they could grow old enough to become repositories of accumulated knowledge. Your grandfather had been 42 when he died, old by the standards of your settlement, where many people died before reaching 30. But 42 years wasn't enough time to learn everything his father had known, let alone pass it all on to the next generation. Knowledge was being lost. You saw evidence of this loss everywhere, once you learned to look for it. There were tools in the settlement that no one could properly maintain anymore because the person who knew the technique had died. There were songs whose words had been slightly corrupted over time, passed from one person to another with small errors creeping in, until they no longer quite made sense, but no one living remembered the original version. There were plants that grew at the edge of the settlement that your grandmother said her grandmother used for medicine, but no one could remember exactly which plants or how to prepare them. Every death meant lost knowledge. Every outbreak that killed elders meant wisdom disappearing from the world, never to be recovered. Your task, and the task of the other young memory keepers, was to slow this loss, to learn as much as possible from the remaining elders, to practice the songs and stories until they were perfect, to observe carefully and create new memory devices for new knowledge being gained through experience, to become yourselves the repositories that would keep the community alive. It was an enormous responsibility for a 12-year-old. On this particular morning, you are sitting with the current oldest person in the settlement. The old grandmother died last winter, and now a man named Stone, for his patience and solidity, holds that position at perhaps 45 years old. He is teaching you about the sickness patterns he has observed over his lifetime. The spotted sickness comes in waves, he tells you, his voice rough from age and illness survived. Not every year. Sometimes many years pass with no outbreak. Then it comes, spreads through the settlement and leaves again. But notice this. He leans forward, intent on making sure you understand. The people who survive the spotted sickness never get it again. Not never exactly, but so rarely that I've only seen it happen twice in my life, and both times the person had been very young when they first survived it. You nod, committing this to memory. You've noticed this too, but hearing it confirmed by Stone, who has lived longer and seen more, makes it feel more solid, more reliable. And the breathing sickness, you ask? This is another disease that sweeps through the settlement periodically, one that makes people cough until they cannot breathe, that fills their lungs with fluid, that kills quickly if it's going to kill at all. Stone considers. The breathing sickness is different. People can get it multiple times. I've had it 3 times myself. Each time I survived, but others didn't. I don't know what makes the difference. Being strong helps. Being well-fed helps. Being lucky helps. He shrugs. Some things we cannot predict. This frustrates you. You want patterns, rules, things you can learn and apply. But Stone is teaching you something equally important, the limits of knowledge, the necessity of accepting uncertainty, the wisdom of knowing what you don't know. What about the children's sickness, you press? The one that makes them feverish and gives them spots in their mouth? Ah, Stone's scarred face creases into something like a smile. That one almost everyone gets as a child. Very few die from it if they're otherwise healthy. And once you've had it, you don't get it again. We used to. He pauses, searching for the right words. When I was young, we would sometimes bring children to be around others who had the children's sickness deliberately, so they would catch it while young when it was less dangerous rather than catching it as adults. This strikes you as both sensible and terrifying, deliberately exposing children to illness? But as Stone explains the reasoning, it begins to make sense. The children's sickness was much more dangerous to adults than to children. An adult who had somehow never caught it in childhood and then encountered it later in life could become seriously ill, could die. But children almost always recovered, so it was better to ensure children caught it early when they were resilient. Does it still work that way, you ask? Could we still do this? Stone shakes his head, slowly. We stopped. 3 years ago, we tried with a group of 5 children who had never had the sickness. We brought them to play with a child who was ill with it. All 5 caught it. 4 recovered. 1 died. Just bad luck, perhaps, or maybe that child was weaker than we realized. But the parents of the dead child were angry. They felt we had killed their son deliberately. Since then, no one has wanted to try it again. You absorb this, understanding the complexity, a practice that usually worked, that saved lives more often than not, but that sometimes failed, and when it failed, someone died who might have lived if they'd never been exposed. How do you weigh that? How do you make that decision? These are the hard questions, Stone says, reading your expression. The questions that don't have clear answers. This is what you must remember and pass on, not just the facts, but the uncertainty. The knowledge that we're doing our best with incomplete understanding. Don't let future generations think we knew everything. Make sure they know we were learning, trying, sometimes failing. The conversation continues for hours. Stone tells you about the patterns he's noticed in animal diseases, how the dogs sometimes get sick before the humans do, how certain livestock illnesses seem to precede human outbreaks by a few days or weeks. He teaches you a new song, one his mother taught him, about the signs that the spotted sickness was beginning to spread. He shares observations about which families seem more susceptible to certain illnesses, whether there might be something in bloodlines that affects survival. All of this, you must remember. You practice the new song until you can sing it perfectly. You repeat back Stone's observations in your own words to make sure you understand correctly. You ask questions about anything unclear. This is how knowledge is preserved, through careful attention, through repetition, through the effort of young minds learning from older ones, before those older ones are gone. But even as you learn, you're aware of how precarious this system is. What if you died tomorrow? What if the next outbreak killed all the young memory keepers at once? What if the diseases that came with agricultural life killed so many people so quickly that there was no one left to remember, no one left to pass on what had been learned? This fear haunts your training. The possibility that your people could lose everything, could be reduced to survivors with no memory of how to survive, with no accumulated wisdom to guide them. It had almost happened once, according to the oldest stories. 2 generations before your birth, there had been an outbreak so severe that only 15 people survived out of a settlement of nearly 60. 15 people, most of them young children, with only 2 elders among them. The knowledge that died in that outbreak was incalculable. Entire areas of expertise simply vanished. Certain techniques for making pottery, certain songs about plant medicine, certain stories about the land and its history. The survivors rebuilt, relearned what they could, adapted, but they knew they had lost something irretrievable, and they instituted new practices to try to prevent such catastrophic knowledge loss, training multiple young people as memory keepers instead of relying on a few elders, spreading important information widely so that if some people died, others would still know, creating redundancy in their knowledge systems, imperfect as those systems were. You are part of that redundancy. You and 3 other young people are all being trained in similar knowledge, all learning the same songs and stories and observations. The hope is that even if some of you die in the next outbreak, at least one will survive to pass on what you've learned. It's a grim calculation, but a necessary one. As the day wears on, you leave Stone to rest. He tires easily now. and go to find the other memory keepers. You find two of them working together near the grain stores, grinding dried seeds into flour. This is typical. Even those with special training must do their share of daily labor. Memory keeping is crucial, but it doesn't feed anyone directly. "Did you learn anything new from Stone?" asks Hawk, a girl a year older than you, named for her sharp vision and attention to detail. You share what Stone taught you about the spotted sickness patterns, about the deliberate exposure of children, about the observations regarding animals. Hawk listens carefully, asking questions to clarify details. The third memory keeper present, a boy named Reed, for his flexibility and quick learning, begins humming the song Stone taught you, trying to learn it from your imperfect first attempts to sing it. This is how knowledge spreads and strengthens, through sharing among the memory keepers, through multiple people learning the same information, through practicing together. By the time you've ground enough grain for the evening meal, all three of you can sing Stone's new song correctly. All three of you have discussed and debated his observations, have added your own thoughts, have committed the essential information to memory. Later, you will teach this same information to the fourth memory keeper, the youngest one, a boy of only 8 who shows promise but is still learning the basic techniques of careful observation and precise recall. You will teach it to others in the settlement too, making sure that critical survival information is spread widely. But the memory keepers hold it most carefully, most precisely, ready to teach it again and again, generation after generation, for as long as your people survive. As evening approaches and you help prepare the communal meal, you find yourself watching the settlement with the observant eyes Stone and the old grandmother taught you to develop. You notice things others might miss, the way one of the children is moving more slowly than usual, perhaps the first sign of illness. The way the dogs are behaving, restless and whining, possibly sensing something in the air. The way the smoke from cooking fires hangs low and thick, which might indicate weather changes coming. All of this matters. All of this is data to be collected, patterns to be recognized, information to be remembered and applied. You live in a world of oral knowledge, where survival depends on human memory and careful observation, where every outbreak teaches lessons that must be preserved or will be learned again through painful experience. After the evening meal, as darkness settles over the settlement, you sit with the other young people around a smaller fire. Some of them ask you to tell stories. This is part of your role, too, to be the entertainer, the keeper of the community's narrative. You tell an old story about the first people who stayed in one place, about the challenges they faced, about how they learned to store food and keep animals. It's a story with a purpose, though the younger children listening don't fully realize it. Embedded in the narrative are details about early agricultural techniques, about the first domestication of dogs, about the decisions your ancestors made. It's entertaining, but it's also educational, passing on historical knowledge in a memorable form. As you tell the story, you make small additions based on what Stone taught you today. You weave in a few lines about observing animals for signs of sickness. You add a verse to one of the songs within the story, incorporating the new information about spotted sickness patterns. This is how knowledge evolves and grows. Each generation adds its observations to the inherited framework. Each storyteller slightly adapts the tale to include new understanding. The children listen, absorbed. They'll remember pieces of this story, and when they're older, those pieces will resurface as useful knowledge. Some of them might become memory keepers themselves, carrying forward the accumulated wisdom of your people into the next generation, if they survive. If the diseases allow them to grow up, if the precarious balance your settlement has achieved between agriculture's benefits and its hidden costs doesn't tip too far toward disaster, these are the fears you carry, the knowledge that makes it hard to sleep some nights. You know things the younger children don't. How many people have died, how much knowledge has been lost, how fragile your community's survival really is. You know that the agricultural way of life that feeds everyone also creates the conditions for epidemics. You know that your people are locked into a cycle they don't fully understand and cannot escape. But you also know this: your people persist, they adapt, They learn. They develop practices and knowledge to cope with the new diseases agriculture has brought. They train memory keepers to preserve what is learned. They create songs and stories to pass on crucial information. They survive outbreaks and develop immunity and continue forward. Humanity, in the form of your small settlement and thousands of similar settlements scattered across the warming, awakening world, is learning to live with the plague it has inadvertently created. The learning is slow and painful and costly in human lives, but it is happening. Your role is to remember, to observe, to preserve what others are learning through bitter experience, to ensure that when the next outbreak comes, and it will come, you know this with certainty, your people will be slightly better prepared, slightly more knowledgeable, slightly more likely to survive. It's not much measured against the magnitude of the crisis, but it's something. It's what you can do. It's how a 12-year-old without writing, without science, without any of the tools future generations will take for granted, can fight back against invisible enemies and help her people survive. The fire burns low and the younger children drift toward sleep. You continue your story a while longer, letting your voice grow softer, more soothing, guiding them gently toward rest. This too is a skill the old grandmother taught you, how to use stories not just to educate, but to comfort, to create a sense of safety and continuity in a dangerous world. When the children are finally asleep, you sit in silence with the other memory keepers. No one speaks for a long time. There's a companionship in the quiet, a shared understanding of the weight you all carry. You are the thin thread connecting past knowledge to future survival. You are what stands between your people and the complete loss of everything learned through bitter experience. I'm forgetting things, Reed says suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. Things the old grandmother taught me before she died. I try to remember the song about winter plant medicine, and some of the words are fuzzy. I'm not sure I have them right anymore. This admission hangs heavy in the air. It's the fear all memory keepers share, that despite your best efforts, despite your training and practice and dedication, the knowledge will slip away. Human memory is imperfect. Without writing to anchor it, information drifts and changes, and sometimes disappears entirely. Sing what you remember, Hawk says quietly. We'll help. Reed begins the song, hesitant at first, then gaining confidence. When he reaches the part where his memory falters, where the words don't quite fit the melody anymore, you and Hawk fill in what you remember. Between the three of you, you reconstruct most of the song. Some verses are lost. No one present learned them, and the old grandmother who knew them completely is gone. But the essential information survives. You practice it together until all three of you can sing it through without mistakes. Then you wake the youngest memory keeper, the 8-year-old, and teach him the song too. By the time you're finished, dawn is approaching. You've spent the night on this one song, this one piece of knowledge, fighting against the tide of forgetting that threatens to sweep away everything your people have learned. It feels simultaneously like a victory and a defeat. You saved the song, but you also recognize how much effort it took, how close you came to losing it entirely. And this is just one song. Among hundreds, one piece of knowledge among thousands. How can you possibly preserve it all? The answer, uncomfortable and inevitable, is that you cannot. Some knowledge will be lost. Some songs will be forgotten. Some observations and techniques and hard-won wisdom will disappear with the people who held them, never to be recovered. This is the cost of living without writing, without external systems to preserve information beyond human memory. But some knowledge will survive. The most important pieces, the ones repeated most often, the ones taught to multiple people, the ones embedded in songs and stories that make them memorable, these will persist. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Enough to help the next generation survive their outbreaks. Enough to keep the accumulated learning growing slowly over generations. Enough to give your people a fighting chance. As dawn breaks fully, you return to your shelter for a few hours of sleep before the day's work begins. Your mind is full of songs and stories, observations and patterns, all the knowledge you've been absorbing and must somehow retain. It feels like trying to hold water in cupped hands. Some always escapes, but if you're careful, if you're skilled, you can hold enough. You dream of your grandfather, his scarred face bent close to yours as he teaches you to identify the first signs of spotted sickness. In the dream, he's telling you something important, something you need to remember, but his words are muffled and unclear. You strain to hear, to understand, knowing that whatever he's saying could save lives, could make the difference between survival and catastrophe. You wake with tears on your face, frustrated by the dream, mourning again the knowledge that died with him. But you also wake with determination renewed. You cannot recover what he took to his grave, but you can preserve what remains. You can add your own observations to the accumulated store. You can teach the next generation as carefully as he taught you. This is your contribution to humanity's survival. Memory, imperfect, partial, but precious beyond measure. In a world where invisible diseases kill more efficiently than any predator, where the agricultural revolution that feeds your people also creates conditions for epidemic spread, where life expectancy is brutally short and wisdom is lost faster than it can be accumulated. In this world, memory is a form of resistance. You remember for those who cannot. You preserve for those not yet born. You observe and learn and teach, fighting the forgetting that threatens to undo everything your people have accomplished through painful experience. It's exhausting work. It's essential work. It's work that will continue for thousands of years, through countless generations of memory keepers and storytellers and knowledge preservers, until finally, though you cannot know this, cannot imagine it, your distant descendants will develop writing systems that can hold information outside human minds, can preserve knowledge across time without requiring anyone to remember. But that's far in the future, unimaginably far from where you stand now. For now there is only memory, only the songs you know, and the stories you tell, and the observations you make, and the desperate effort to hold on to wisdom in a world where wisdom dies with every death, where every outbreak steals irreplaceable knowledge along with irreplaceable lives. The sun rises fully, and you emerge from your shelter to begin another day. There is grain to grind, water to carry, children to watch, animals to tend. And through it all, there is observing to do, patterns to notice, knowledge to gather and hold, and eventually pass on. You spot the child you noticed last evening, the one moving slowly. This morning, the slowness is more pronounced. The child seems feverish, withdrawn. You alert the adults, sharing your observation, and they move the child away from others, beginning the familiar routine of isolation and care that sometimes helps limit the spread of disease. Is this the beginning of another outbreak, or just an isolated illness that will pass quickly? You don't know yet. No one knows. But you'll watch carefully, noting how the illness progresses, whether others fall sick, what treatments seem to help. You'll add these observations to your accumulating store of knowledge about disease patterns and survival. And if this child dies, you'll remember them, not just as a death, a tragedy, but as a data point in the larger pattern your people are learning to recognize. It sounds cold, reducing a person to information, but it's the opposite of cold. It's how you honor the dead, by learning from their deaths, by using what their suffering teaches to help others survive. This is humanity's first great plague, and you are living through it without understanding what plagues are, without germ theory or epidemiology or medicine as later generations will know it. You have only observation and memory, pattern recognition and accumulated wisdom, songs and stories, and the desperate hope that what you're learning will be enough. So far, it has been. Your settlement survives. Your people persist. The knowledge grows slowly and imperfectly, but it grows. Each generation learns from the one before, adds its own observations, passes forward what it can. The system is fragile and flawed and frustratingly inefficient, but it works just well enough to keep humanity alive through its most dangerous transition. As the day progresses, you grind grain into flour, your hands moving in the rhythm you've known since childhood, a rhythm that will mark the rest of your life. It's boring work, repetitive and hard on the body, the kind of labor your hunter-gatherer ancestors never had to do. But it produces food that can be stored, food that can support a larger population, food that enables your people to stay in one place and accumulate knowledge rather than constantly moving. Everything is trade-offs. The agricultural life brings diseases, but also brings the possibility of preserved knowledge, of building on what came before. The settled life brings epidemics, but also brings time to observe and learn, to develop practices and techniques that hunting and gathering never allowed. You pound the grain and think about these contradictions, these impossible choices your ancestors made without fully understanding the consequences. And you wonder what choices your generation is making, what unintended consequences will unfold from decisions that seem reasonable now, but might prove catastrophic to your descendants. Will they judge you harshly, those future people? Will they wonder why you didn't see, didn't understand, didn't make better choices? Or will they recognize, as you're beginning to recognize about your ancestors, that everyone does the best they can with the knowledge available? That hindsight makes everything look clearer than it was in the moment? That survival itself is an accomplishment worth honoring? These are big thoughts for a 12-year-old, too big perhaps. But being a memory keeper means carrying big thoughts, means understanding your people's history and place in the world more deeply than others your age. It means bearing the weight of knowledge and the burden of preservation and the fear that despite your best efforts, it might not be enough. The isolated child develops a rash by evening. You recognize it immediately, the spotted sickness, the one that comes in waves, the one that kills some and scars others and leaves survivors immune. Your heart sinks. If this is truly the beginning of an outbreak, many will fall ill in the coming weeks, many will die, and all you can do is watch and remember and hope to learn something new that might help next time. Stone calls a meeting that evening. He gathers the adults and the older children, including the memory keepers, and discusses what should be done. Should they isolate all children from the sick one, or is it already too late? Should they use the old practice of deliberate exposure for children who've never had the spotted sickness, or avoid it after the death 3 years ago? Should they try the various plant medicines that sometimes seem to help, or save those resources for people who might benefit more? There are no clear answers. People debate, share observations from previous outbreaks, express fears and hopes. You listen carefully, noting the different perspectives, the reasoning behind each suggested approach. This too is knowledge worth preserving, not just what was decided, but how decisions were made, what factors were considered, what uncertainties were acknowledged. Eventually, the community decides on a middle path. Isolate the sick child and anyone who has clear contact with them, but don't separate families unless absolutely necessary. Watch everyone carefully for signs of illness. Prepare the plant medicines just in case. Don't deliberately expose children, but don't go to extreme lengths to prevent exposure either. The disease will spread or it won't, and experience suggests that once it appears, trying to stop it completely is futile. It's a pragmatic approach born of bitter experience. Your people have learned that some things can be influenced but not controlled, that their power over disease is limited, that accepting this limitation is part of wisdom. Over the following days, more people fall ill. Not everyone. The survivors of previous outbreaks remain healthy, their body's memory protecting them, but many. The settlement's rhythm changes as healthy people take on extra work to compensate for those who are sick. You find yourself grinding grain for longer hours, carrying water for families unable to care for themselves, watching younger children whose parents are fevered and weak. And through it all, you observe. You note who falls ill, and in what order, looking for patterns. You watch which treatments seem to help and which seem to make no difference. You pay attention to who survives and who doesn't, trying to understand what factors influence outcomes. Age matters. The very young and the older people are more vulnerable. General health matters. Those who were well fed and strong beforehand survive more often. Previous exposure matters most of all. Those who survived the spotted sickness before don't get it again. But beyond these broad patterns, much remains mysterious. Why does one healthy young adult die while another seemingly identical survives? Why does the disease sometimes come back in waves within a single outbreak, seeming to fade and then surging again? Why does it spread so quickly through some families but skip others entirely, even when they live close together? These are questions you cannot answer, frustrating gaps in understanding, But you note the questions themselves, preserving them for future generations. Perhaps your grandchildren or their grandchildren will find answers. Perhaps the accumulated observations of many outbreaks across many generations will eventually reveal patterns invisible to any single observer. This is how knowledge grows in a world without writing, without science. Slowly, imperfectly, through lived experience and careful observation, and the preservation of questions as well as answers. It's an agonizingly slow process compared to what future humanity will achieve, but it's all you have, and it's working, barely, just enough. 3 weeks into the outbreak, 12 people have died. 27 have fallen ill and survived, their bodies now scarred, but protected. The disease is fading, fewer new cases each day, burning through its available hosts and finding itself with nowhere left to spread. Your settlement will recover, depleted, but alive, carrying forward the hard-won immunity of survivors. You have survived another outbreak. You have observed and learned and remembered. You have added your generation's experience to the accumulating store of knowledge. And when you're older, when you're the one teaching young memory keepers instead of being taught, you'll pass it all forward. The songs, the stories, the observations, the questions, the uncertainties, and the hard-won wisdom that keeping knowledge alive is itself a form of keeping your people alive. This is your purpose. This is your contribution to humanity's survival through its deadliest age, when diseases born of agricultural life are killing more efficiently than humanity has ever experienced, when life expectancy is measured in decades rather than the centuries to come, when every outbreak threatens to destroy not just lives, but the knowledge that makes future survival possible. You are a memory keeper in an age before memory could be written, a knowledge preserver in a time when preservation meant human effort and nothing else, a thread connecting past learning to future survival in humanity's first great plague. And somehow, impossibly, it's enough. You are kneeling in mud and animal waste, your hands buried in the thick wool of a sheep that is trying very hard to die, and you are thinking about the day your father brought this animal home. You were 6 then, perhaps 7. Your father had traded for the sheep, a young ewe nervous and bleeding, with travelers who had passed through from the eastern settlements. Those eastern people, it was said, had been keeping sheep for many generations, had learned secrets about managing them, about breeding them for wool and meat, about keeping them alive through winters and away from predators. Your father was proud of his trade. The sheep represented wealth, security, the future. She would produce lambs, and those lambs would produce more lambs, and soon your family would have a small flock. You would have wool for weaving, meat when hunting was poor, milk for drinking and making cheese. The sheep was an investment in survival. Now, 10 years later, you are watching that investment die of a disease that has already killed 3 other sheep and has started spreading to the humans in your settlement. The sheep's breathing is labored, rattling wetly in her lungs. Her eyes are glazed with fever. Fluid leaks from her nose, thick and yellow-green. You've seen this before, in the sheep that died last week, and in the 2 before that. And now you're seeing it in people, too. Your cousin has the same symptoms, the same wet cough, the same struggling breath. 2 days ago, he was helping you repair a section of fence. Yesterday, he could barely stand. This morning, he couldn't get out of bed. Your hands work, automatically trying to position the sheep more comfortably, trying to clear the fluid from her airways, trying to do something, anything, even though you know it's probably futile. Your father stands nearby, watching with the expression of someone who has already counted a loss, but hasn't yet accepted it. "We should kill her now," he says quietly. "End it quickly, then burn the body. Don't let the other sheep near her. Don't let anyone eat the meat." You nod, understanding the reasoning even as you mourn. The sheep is dying anyway. Better to end her suffering and take precautions against spreading whatever illness she carries. Your people have learned this lesson through bitter experience. Sick animals can make humans sick. The mechanism is mysterious, but the pattern is clear enough. Whatever afflicts the livestock sometimes jumps to their keepers. Your father moves to get the killing tools, and you stay with the sheep, stroking her wool, murmuring meaningless comfort. She is in her way a member of your household, Your family has cared for her and her offspring for a decade. You've watched her give birth, have bottle-fed orphaned lambs, have sheared her wool each spring and marveled at the useful fiber that could be spun and woven into cloth. She has been valuable. She has been useful. And she has, though neither you nor anyone in your settlement understands this yet, been a vector for diseases that are reshaping humanity's relationship with death. This is the hidden cost of domestication, the price your species pays for keeping animals close. The animals bring their diseases with them, and those diseases evolve and adapt and sometimes learn to infect human hosts. The agricultural revolution isn't just about planting crops and staying in one place. It's also about living intimately with animals in ways humans never had before and suffering the consequences. Your people know that animals can make you sick, but they don't understand how or why. They don't know about viruses and bacteria, about zoonotic transmission, about the specific biological mechanisms that allow a pathogen to jump from one species to another. They only know the pattern. Sick animals often precede sick humans. Animals that die mysteriously should be avoided. Close contact with livestock means risk, but the benefits of keeping animals are too great to abandon. The sheep provide wool, meat, milk, and manure for fertilizing crops. The goats are hardy and can eat plants humans can't digest, converting that into useful products. The cattle are strong enough to help with heavy labor, and their milk can sustain children when other food is scarce. And the pigs will eat almost anything, turning waste into meat with remarkable efficiency. All of these animals also carry diseases, and living with them in close quarters, day after day, season after season, generation after generation, creates endless opportunities for those diseases to make the jump to human hosts. This is what's happening now in your settlement and in thousands of settlements across the world where humans are experimenting with agriculture and animal domestication. Pathogens that evolve to infect sheep or goats or pigs are mutating, adapting, learning to survive in human bodies. Each new case of animal-to-human transmission is an experiment, and sometimes those experiments succeed. Sometimes a virus finds that human hosts are even better than its original animal hosts, more numerous, more mobile, better at spreading infection to new victims. When that happens, when a zoonotic disease successfully adapts to human transmission, you get epidemics. You get plagues. You get the kind of outbreak currently sweeping through your settlement, killing sheep and humans alike, teaching lessons written in death about the dangers of living too close to animals. Your father returns with a blade and a heavy stone. The sheep's death is quick. He's skilled at this, has killed many animals over his lifetime. But there's something different about this killing, something more somber. This isn't slaughter for food. This is culling a diseased animal trying to protect the rest of the flock and the human family that depends on them. You help him carry the body away from the livestock pens, out to a bare area where you've burned other carcasses recently. The sheep is heavier than you expected. Even in her sickness, she's a substantial animal, 60 or 70 pounds of wool and meat that would normally be valuable. Now she's just a biohazard, something to be destroyed. The fire burns hot, fed with dry wood you've gathered specifically for this purpose. You've burned enough dead animals recently that you've learned the right technique, enough fuel to completely consume the body, positioned carefully so the smoke blows away from the settlement. The smell is awful, greasy and thick, but you stay until the work is finished, making sure the fire doesn't spread, making sure nothing remains that could spread infection. By the time you return to the settlement, it's late afternoon. The livestock pens smell of fear and sickness. The remaining animals know something is wrong, are agitated, and difficult. You check on them methodically, looking for signs of the same illness that killed the ewe. 2 more sheep are showing early symptoms. By tomorrow, you'll probably be burning them too. The pattern is clear. The disease is spreading through the flock, jumping from animal to animal faster than you can isolate or cull. And alongside the animal outbreak, the human illness is spreading too. Your cousin is not the only one sick. 3 children are fevered and coughing. An elderly woman who helped tend the sheep is struggling to breathe. More will fall ill tomorrow and the day after and the day after that. Your settlement is learning painfully and directly that domesticated animals are a double-edged gift. They provide food and materials and labor, yes, But they also provide diseases, pathogens that evolve alongside them, threats that your hunter-gatherer ancestors rarely faced because they didn't live in constant close contact with animals. The historical irony, though you cannot possibly know this, is profound. The very animals that enable agricultural civilization, that allow for food surplus, population growth, technological development, and all the complexity of settled life, are also the source of humanity's deadliest diseases. Measles comes from cattle. Smallpox probably comes from cattle or camels. Influenza comes from pigs and birds. The plague itself, which will devastate civilizations thousands of years in your future, comes from rodents attracted to stored grain and lives in the fleas those rodents carry. Domestication is a bargain with hidden costs, and you're living through the period when humanity is just beginning to understand that there's a price to be paid. That evening, as you prepare a simple meal of grain porridge and dried fish, your father speaks about the problem everyone is thinking about, but no one wants to say aloud, "We might need to kill all the sheep." The suggestion hangs heavy in the air. Your mother, stirring the pot, doesn't look up, but her movement's slow. Your younger siblings, sitting nearby, look confused. They're too young to fully understand the implications. All of them, you ask, though you already know the answer is probably yes. If the sickness keeps spreading, if more people die. Your father trails off, the reasoning obvious. The sheep are valuable, but human lives are more valuable. If the animals are killing people, the animals must go. But it's not a simple decision. Your family has invested years in building up the flock. The sheep represent a significant portion of your wealth and food security. Killing them all means starting over from nothing, means losing years of work and careful breeding. It means next winter will be harder. Next spring will have no wool for weaving. Next year's trade possibilities will be diminished. Yet the alternative, keeping the sheep while they spread disease to humans, is unthinkable. This is the kind of impossible choice that agricultural life forces on people. Hunter-gatherers rarely faced such dilemmas. If an area became dangerous or unproductive, they moved. If a particular food source caused problems, they avoided it. The investment in any single resource was limited. The ability to adapt and change was high. But farmers and herders are locked into their investments. You cannot simply walk away from a flock you've spent years building, from grain stores you've accumulated over seasons, from shelters you've constructed to last. You're tied to place and possessions in ways that create both security and vulnerability. Your father's face shows the weight of this impossible choice. He's trying to calculate odds. How many sheep might survive if we wait? How many people might die? What the right balance is between economic necessity and human life. It's the kind of mathematical tragedy that no one should have to compute, but that agricultural life imposes constantly. "Let's wait 3 more days," your mother says finally, her voice quiet but firm. "See if the sickness peaks and fades like it did last time. If it's still spreading after 3 days, if more people are falling ill, then yes, kill them all." It's a compromise, a way to delay the decision while gathering more information. Your father nods slowly, accepting this. 3 days isn't long enough for the economic loss to increase dramatically, but it's long enough to see the pattern more clearly, to know whether this is a disease that will burn through quickly or one that will linger and spread. You eat your simple meal in relative silence, each person lost in their own thoughts. The younger children sense the adults' worry and become quiet themselves. Outside, you can hear the sheep bleating, anxious and uncomfortable, perhaps sensing their own peril. After eating, you go to check on your cousin. He lies in his family's shelter, breathing in short, painful gasps, his mother sitting beside him with a cloth dampened in cool water, trying to bring down the fever that makes his skin burn to the touch. The similarity to the dying sheep is striking and horrifying. The same labored breathing, the same fluid in the lungs, the same helpless decline despite all efforts to help. "How is he?" you ask, though the answer is obvious. His mother just shakes her head, her face drawn with exhaustion and fear. She's been tending him for days now, barely sleeping, trying everything she knows to help. The plant medicines that sometimes ease fevers, The cool water to bring down temperature, the careful positioning to help him breathe, the constant presence and comfort of someone who loves him. None of it is enough. The disease that learned to infect humans by living in sheep doesn't care about plant medicine or maternal devotion. It follows its own logic, its own patterns of infection and inflammation, its own timeline of progression. You sit with them for a while, offering the only thing you can, your presence, your company in the difficult hours. Your cousin is barely conscious, lost in fever dreams, occasionally whimpering or calling out names of people not present. His mother murmurs to him constantly, soothing sounds more than words, the universal language of comfort that requires no translation. As night deepens, you leave them and return to your own shelter. Your younger siblings are already asleep, curled together for warmth and comfort. Your parents sit by the small fire, talking in low voices about contingency plans, what they'll do if the disease spreads further, how they'll manage the work of the settlement with so many people sick, what alternative food sources they can rely on if the sheep must be culled. These are the grinding practical concerns of agricultural life, not just surviving day to day, but planning ahead, managing resources, making decisions that will affect the family's well-being for seasons to come. It's the complexity that comes with staying in one place, with investing in livestock and crops, with building an economy based on stored surplus rather than immediate consumption. You lie down to sleep, but rest doesn't come easily. Your mind keeps returning to the dying sheep, to your suffering cousin, to the pattern that connects them, the pattern of disease jumping from animals to humans, of domestication's hidden costs, of the price humanity pays for agricultural civilization. In the darkness, you hear one of the sheep crying out, a sound of distress that seems to carry across the whole settlement. Another one sick, probably. Another one dying. Another potential source of human infection. Another vector for the disease that's teaching your people that living with animals means living with their pathogens too. Tomorrow you'll check the remaining sheep carefully. You'll help your father decide which ones need to be culled immediately, which ones might be salvageable, whether the 3-day waiting period your mother proposed is realistic or just postponing the inevitable. You'll visit your cousin again, hoping for improvement but preparing for decline. You'll do the necessary work of the settlement, grinding grain, carrying water, tending crops, while also managing the crisis of disease among both animals and humans. This is your life now, has been your life for years, will continue to be your life for all the years ahead. It's a life shaped by agricultural revolution, by the decision generations ago to stay in one place and keep animals and plant crops. It's a life your hunter-gatherer ancestors wouldn't recognize, wouldn't understand the logic of. But it's the life that will lead eventually to civilization, to cities and writing and accumulated knowledge and all the complexity of human culture. The path forward goes through this suffering, through these diseases, through these impossible choices about whether to keep the animals that feed you, but might also kill you. Your people are living through humanity's most dangerous transition, paying in death and disease for the advantages agricultural life will eventually provide. The bargain is terrible but necessary, cruel but unavoidable. You cannot go back to hunting and gathering. Too much has been invested, too much knowledge accumulated about farming and animal keeping. Too many people depend on the food surplus that agriculture provides. You can only go forward, learning through painful experience how to manage the diseases that come with domestication, how to care for sick animals and sick humans, how to make the impossible calculations about when to cull and when to preserve, when to risk and when to retreat. These lessons are being learned simultaneously across the agricultural world, in every region where humans have recently transitioned to farming and animal keeping. Different animals, different diseases, but the same basic pattern. Domestication brings pathogens. Living closely with animals means living with their illnesses, and sometimes those illnesses adapt to spread among humans with devastating efficiency. In the darkness of your shelter, listening to the distressed sheep and thinking about your dying cousin, you wonder if there will ever come a time when humans understand these diseases well enough to prevent them, to cure them, to live with animals without this constant threat of illness jumping from livestock to people. It seems impossible, like wondering if humans will ever fly or live underwater or visit the stars. The diseases are invisible, incomprehensible, following patterns that seem almost malicious in their targeting of the vulnerable and the young and the previously healthy. But what you can't know, what you can't possibly imagine, is that yes, eventually, thousands of years in the future, your descendants will understand exactly how zoonotic diseases work. They'll identify the specific pathogens, will see them under microscopes, will understand the mutations that allow animal viruses to infect human hosts. They'll develop vaccines and treatments, will create public health systems to manage outbreaks, will make the connection between animal health and human health explicit and actionable. They'll look back at your time, at the agricultural revolution and the diseases it spawned, and they'll understand what you're living through without understanding. They'll recognize that you and your people are paying the initial cost for benefits that will compound over millennia, that your suffering is purchasing, in the cruelest possible currency, the foundation for civilization. But that knowledge is far, far in the future. For now there is only the present, the sick sheep, the dying cousin, the impossible choices, the grinding fear that this outbreak might be the one that kills too many people to recover from, that destroys your settlement's fragile hold on survival. You finally drift into uneasy sleep, and in your dreams you see animals, sheep and goats and pigs and cattle, but they're somehow wrong, their eyes too knowing, their movements too purposeful. In the dream logic that needs no explanation, you understand that the animals are teaching you something, showing you a truth about the bargain humanity has made with them. We feed you, the animals say without words, but we also kill you. We provide for you, but we also infect you. We are the price and the payment both. You cannot have civilization without us, but you cannot have us without disease. It's a truth you half know already, a pattern you've observed without fully articulating. The dream simply makes it explicit, gives form to the understanding that's been growing in you through years of living with livestock, of watching animals sicken and humans sicken in parallel, of seeing the invisible threads that connect domestication to disease. When you wake just before dawn, the dream fades, but its message remains. You understand now, more clearly than before, what your people are living through. A transformation of humanity's relationship with animals, from occasional hunting and distant observation to constant proximity and mutual dependence. And with that transformation comes risk, comes disease, comes death, on a scale your ancestors never faced. This is the deadliest plague that's reshaping humanity. Not a single disease, but a whole category of them, all flowing from the same source. The animals you invited to live beside you, the animals you domesticated and depended on, the animals that now share not just your space, but also their pathogens. You rise and begin another day, ready to face whatever it brings. More sick sheep, more sick humans, more impossible decisions, more lessons written in suffering about the price of agricultural civilization. Ready to learn, through lived experience, what future generations will only study in history, that humanity's greatest transformation came at humanity's greatest cost, that the plague we invited in through our own choices nearly destroyed us before we learned to survive it, that domestication was and remains a bargain written in blood and disease and bitter necessity. The sun rises on your settlement, on your dying cousin, on your remaining sheep, on the impossible present that will somehow lead to a future where humans understand all of this and survive anyway. But that's tomorrow's story and tomorrow's hope. Today there is only survival, only the work that must be done, only the choices that must be made and the prices that must be paid. Today the animals you invited in are teaching their lessons, and all you can do is try to learn them before too many more people die.